Hello.
Our story begins on Coruscant at two separate locations, where the fate of the galaxy sat undetermined. Inside the works in the industrial sector, a massive duel was taking place. Inside of the Jedi Temple, a ceremony was commencing. Both of these were a result of failure and success. The Jedi had gained a new asset, the Sith had lost one, and even with the promise of a replacement, the true Sith Lord was not pleased. Red lightsabers illuminated the Sith hideout as Darth Jar Jar slung his saber through the air swiftly. His idle state of goofiness had vanished, and he was now a true product of what created him. Jar Jar's master, Plagueis the Wise, was dead. It was an old trick Plagueis had used for decades. He would train two separate individuals, with the hope that they might grow to extraordinary powers. Jar Jar and Palpatine were products of Plagueis' teachings, and the Gungan Sith apprentice, while younger than Sidious, learned of the truth. The elder Mun, Sith Lord, knew he would be betrayed, and while he didn't anticipate it as soon as it came, he sent a warning to his second student prior to the events at Naboo completing. Jar Jar was here for revenge. Sidious was fighting out of confusion, because he knew no reality in which there was another Sith. Their sabers danced across the halls of the works. Sidious and Jar Jar were both familiarized with this location. Plagueis brought them here separately to show it to them, and gift his students with the infinite wisdom that sat there. Jar Jar dove downwards, cutting a circle into the floor, sending sparks up into Palpatine's eyes. Sidious blocked his face, twirling his matching sabers and spinning them forward. The two Sith locked their blades, and Jar Jar, as one of Plagueis' former students would have, detached his saber staff and whipped a second piece at Palpatine. It acted more like a Shoto, but was longer than the typical aiding saber. Sidious was able to avoid the strike by ducking out of the way, before throwing his hands up and blasting electricity, but Jar Jar, without reaction, moved both of his hands into a V shape and deflected the electricity back at its creator. Palpatine threw his hands up to defend himself, but he was pushed backwards in surprise. Jar Jar, using the blinding light as an aid, lunged forward, strafing Palpatine and sliding behind him, jabbing the Shoto into Sidious' hip and then pulling it out before ducking and rolling across the floor. Palpatine swung aimlessly to defend himself, and as he turned to where Jar Jar was supposed to be, the Gungan Sith Lord moved through the air and threw his hands down, which cemented Sidious into the ground, and as Jar Jar landed, he smacked his blade at Palpatine's location, killing him in a singular blow. As he came to learn, though, Sidious was not the only Sith. Jar Jar was to become the beneficiary of Sidious's work with Jedi Master Dooku, the newest Sith to their ranks. The younger Sith Lord, Jar Jar, now had to fill in for Plagueis, as he accepted a much older Jedi as his new apprentice. Jar Jar, Plagueis, and Palpatine combined their efforts to make their plan for destroying the Republic more approachable. While Jar Jar never knew of Palpatine's actual involvement, he did know that some things would need to be changed. For starters, Dooku would be moving into the Galactic Senate, instead of going to Serena to become the Count. Across the city, Hondo Ohnaka bowed before the 12 members of the High Council. He had just saved Qui-Gon's, Obi-Wan's, and Anakin's life. The Weequay Jedi, entering his mid-30s, had disarmed and killed Maul in the final moments of what would have been his victory over Qui-Gon. Hondo had dropped from the ceiling in the power room and cut Maul into pieces, just as the Sith apprentice used the middle of his staff to fling Qui-Gon's weapon over his head. With Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and Anakin returning to Coruscant, Master Ohnaka had made his case to the Council. He did serve on the Council, after being instructed by the legendary Yariel Poof. It's why the two of them were the funniest Jedi to interact with. Hondo had the natural wit, but his former instructor had given him the legs to be the life of the Jedi Order. This ceremony was the changing of the guard. While Master Ohnaka had a long way to go until being an elder genius like his dear old Yariel, he was the shining glimmer of hope in the Order, unique enough to hold policy and personal positions equatable to Qui-Gon Jinn, ambitious enough to have the role of head Jedi archivist, and stern enough to be the next Master Mundi. Hondo was the mix of the best aspects of the Jedi Order, and for the first time in centuries, Yoda finally saw someone reasonable enough to become the next Grand Master. The idea was floated to him by Mace Windu on their journey from Coruscant to Naboo. There was the official apology sent out by the Council for refusing to believe their ally Qui-Gon Jinn. Hondo, in all fairness, shouldn't have been on Naboo, but he believed Qui-Gon, and avoided his own mandate to be of an assistance, which he was. He was separated before the assault actually began, which is why he showed up to the duel late, but it was all pretty profitable in his eyes. Both ancient religions have been changed exponentially. Even though it might seem minuscule from the exterior, Lord Binks and Master Ohnaka offer different perspectives on the Sith and Jedi orders, ones that permitted them, hopefully, to progress their factions into the ever-changing galactic environment. Newt Gunray, for starters, without the protection of Palpatine or Jar Jar, would be put to death. It would leave the Trade Federation in shock, but have them sending out assassins to kill the Queen of Naboo. All of these would fail. Dooku would work his way into the Senator's seat for Sereno, and Jar Jar would become the next Senator of Naboo, as Padme continued to serve out her term as Queen. It was a nice balance, but instead of creating a coalition within their control, Dooku and Jar Jar strived to create a resistance movement that they could stomp out together. With the clone armies under their control, they wanted to turn the Jedi into separatist loyalists, and then crush them both in one fell swoop. Controlling both factions could lead to some unforeseen tension between the two of them, and Jar Jar wasn't going to trust any other Sith with the importance of this future conflict. Ironically, the new Sith vision didn't include a galactic empire. Instead, it revolved around the total destruction of the Jedi. Where Palpatine was power-obsessed, Jar Jar was force-obsessed, hence why his relationship with Plagueis was less strained. Their appreciation for the Force and even some of the finer things in life made them a much more compatible duo of Sith in the new era. If Palpatine had been removed from the equation, they may have become the first ever eternal Sith. But now, Jar Jar worked heavily with Dooku, and it was going positively, for now. Yoda went into exile, not really exile, but on a brash vow, following the loss of Dooku. It was his last student and a burden that ate him alive. He couldn't really handle the loss of Dooku the way he had previously hoped he would. It was just a nagging burden that never really left his heart. It wasn't like he openly saw Dooku as a Sith, it was the fact that Dooku abandoned the Order for politics, and that was heartbreaking. Yoda was no longer serving on the High Council anyways, so it wasn't the biggest deal in the world for him to take this vow. He retreated to join Master Kirak and Phila on the world of Al-Dalim. Inside the bureaucratic chambers of the Jedi Council, Grand Master Ohnaka encouraged Qui-Gon's training of Anakin Skywalker, though this was encouraged with an entourage of other, more experienced masters handpicked by Hondo and Qui-Gon. The rationale Master Ohnaka came to was that it would be more profitable to give Skywalker a wider range of instructors. Among this group were Pong Krell, Luminara Unduli, Qui-Gon, Hondo himself, Ram Koda, Shak Ti, Quinlan Vos, and Yaddle, who hadn't been killed by Dooku due to the High Council ceremony. This choice became reflected in the High Council deliberations. Yoda's take on classic High Republic policies had worn their welcome, because the political landscape had broken free from such a golden age, which was soon to be referred to as the Gilded Republic, for its short-lived brilliance. Hondo, though, because of his keen interest in Republic affairs, decided to have Jedi within the Senate chambers, disguised as representatives. The switch of Chancellor was a bit odd, and while Hondo preferred to remain more separated from the Republic, he had to acknowledge that something was brewing. He was reasonable enough to recognize that the Trade Federation did not act alone. Not to say that they were a Sith-run organization, but enough to say that they had been at the very least encouraged to act out like they did at Naboo. The shock of the Federation Council and their Republic representative proved to Hondo that they had suspected to blockade Naboo and get away with it, with little to no repercussions. The reaction, even in his eyes, gave off a signal that they thought Gunray would return to serving their board of leadership. This didn't even cover the odd disappearance of Palpatine after 24 hours or so of ruling. The council wasn't exactly fond of Hondo's suggestion, but they followed it regardless. This came from cases and points proven by Ohnaka, and the council obliged because they trusted their Grand Master's decision-making. The game of generational dejarik played between Sith and Jedi had begun again. The next several years would be mimicking this game in grand strokes. Pieces on the board were moved once every few months. But every counter, despite the Jedi not knowing where the Sith were, was perfect. They, with the leadership of the new Grand Master, were able to remain on the trail. They just didn't know where they were going with it. This was a consistent movement that had the Sith confused, but the truth is, Hondo was just reading the room. Considering that Dooku was front and center and aging rapidly, it only pointed to one reality, that he was using the dark side. It did make Hondo sad because he had learned a lot in his interactions with the man now called Tyrannus. The Jedi didn't even directly interact with Senator Dooku, because aside from their undercover assets, he aligned himself with several movements within the Senate, meant to challenge Jedi positions. Masameda, the current standing chancellor, wasn't necessarily pushing towards a divided republic. This came from collaborating subcommittees and councils that tried to divide the republic itself. In essence, this was the exact same thing Palpatine would have done, just with more steps and less power. Jar Jar wasn't on the radar of the Jedi because Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon mostly forgot about the insane skill set depicted by Binks on Naboo. Their missions were much more different now anyways. Qui-Gon was instructing Skywalker, and Kenobi had taken on the training of Barriss Offee. It was a good environment for the proclaimed Chosen One to grow up within, one that especially avoided the politics of the fracturing Republic. In 28 BBY, with election year moving up into the front of the Republic, Grand Master Ohnaka did something rambunctious, perhaps even dangerous. He threw his name in the hat to become Chancellor of the Republic. This wasn't something he confronted the High Council on, just a spur-of-the-moment decision. In a weird way, Hondo and Sifo Dyas were very similar. They didn't get along per se, but their abilities were almost uniform, except for one aspect that changed for the two of them. Sifo Dyas had visions of the future in great distance, increments of time that wouldn't come to life for another decade or more. Hondo was the opposite. His visions were within coming days or weeks, never more than a singular month ahead. These were in-depth visions, and they were the cause for his bid for the Chancellor's seat. Hondo had seen Crimson Sabers inside the Senate building. Doing what? He didn't know, but he was acting on it. The former Grand Master, Yoda, would have suggested steadiness when sensing the future, but because Hondo was seeing it from his perspective, he believed he'd be sacrificing himself to expose the entirety of the Sith. It was his hope after all. Something that drastically changed from Yoda's council into Hondo's was his actual interest in fighting the Sith. Members of the council frequently examined known homeworlds of the Sith, and constantly searched for hives of darkness in the galaxy. None of this actually resulted in any new knowledge, but the fact that he kept this in the front of their minds was imperative to their support in his bid for Chancellor. Running against the likes of Bail Antilles of Alderaan, Senator Dooku of Sereno, and Lot Dot of the Trade Federation had Hondo in a weird position. He was a Jedi running for political office, which isn't exactly the greatest look for the Jedi Order. However, what the Grand Master was able to accomplish with his words and his vibrant understanding of the Galactic Senate made him a true competitor. As mentioned before, Hondo Ohnaka could have been a Jedi archivist. That was not just hyperbole, because he had a lot of knowledge. Thanks in part massively to Yariel Poof being his instructor, he was highly interested in information. Due to his master being a member on the High Council, Hondo frequently had to listen to political gobbledygook between Yariel and other members of the Council and Order. Instead of avoiding these discussions, he would record them and listen to them at night before searching for all possible information on all of the subjects, so that he could keep up with the discussions held between his instructor and other Jedi. It impressed all of them. Perhaps it's why he sat on the High Council from such a young age. This propelled him into the public spotlight. Between his outrageous euphemisms, analogies, comparisons, and literary devices, he won over the ears of members within the Senate. His efforts, though, did not go unnoticed, because the likes of the Sith, after attempting to propel Dooku into the Chancellor role, were becoming annoyed. The Jedi threat wasn't just frustrating to deal with, but a true show of their arrogance. This was a Sith movement that posed the first true threat to the Jedi in generations, and they seemingly managed to stomp it out. Hondo wasn't polling above the former senator of Alderaan, but he was racing ahead of Dooku, who stumbled behind Lot Dod due to some unfavorable policy decisions he attempted to implement. The Sith plan was nearly falling into shambles. but thanks in part to some of these Jedi investigators around the Senate building, they'd have no issue exposing themselves to the Grand Master. A few weeks before the election of 28 BBY, Hondo was speaking to a committee of senators on a new bill being proposed to give tax cuts to systems with lower crime percentages. It was a move to incentivize societies to maintain their own domestic affairs, to give Republic intelligence a decision for militaristic movement. Without an actual Republic military, it would be groups of military-aligned sects, essentially rooting out potential locations of criminal syndicate alliances and giving a clear direction on Outer Rim breaches into Republic territory. That was the point. The Jedi Master had a lot of information on this topic. Being a weequay himself, and having served many missions in the Outer Rim, led to him having quite the foundation of information to spread to the senators in session. Among them was Dooku of Serenno. He and the Grand Master, nor any other Jedi in Dooku, had spoken since his disassociation from the Jedi Order. Master Ohnaka held nothing against it. In his opinion, it was poor business. But the Jedi weren't inclined to chase anyone with ulterior aspirations for power. Ironic considering the fact that Hondo was making a run for chancellor. Dooku's position inside this committee was entirely superficial. None of his other policy positions aligned with him being here, so it was a little funny that he even showed his face at this meeting, because he didn't side with any of these individuals ever. Regardless of what the now appearingly older Dooku thought of his placement with the Sith, he would learn a lot about himself in this meeting. Dooku joined Jar Jar out of a hope for a better republic. Instead, he got tons of deliberations that led to nothing. Qui-Gon and he hadn't even spoken since he abandoned the Order. This wasn't pettiness, but Master Jin felt no need to try and coerce his growingly radical master to change his ways. Throughout this committee meeting, Dooku felt more and more disturbed. He had lost everything in the process of joining the Sith. His hopes were to extinguish the Jedi and bring Qui-Gon to the dark side, but without the constant nagging of the Master Manipulator Palpatine in his ear, he felt drawn back towards the old path. Hondo continued pouncing around topics with his overly exaggerated tone and his seemingly frazzled demeanor. A weird man that, despite not drinking a ton, sounded hammered almost every time he stepped in front of people. There was an odd charisma about the Grand Master, and the senators were all drawn in by the theatrics of it. Dooku, in a moment's notice, bursted to his feet and stormed out of the room, prompting Hondo to make a joke at Dooku's expense once the doors closed behind him. The room erupted into laughter, ceasing all awkwardness, and Hondo continued with his own plannings, which continued to levy more support into his corner. Lot Dab was a strong competitor, but he managed to steal a majority of votes from the business sector. Dooku had some leverage in the mid-rim, with powerhouses like Serenno and Onderon, whereas the true competition sat between Bail Antilles and Hondo. People at this point had a fondness for the Jedi, and the prospect of another Outer Rim-born Chancellor enticed people from around the rims to throw their support at Hondo. Antilles had the core in the palm of his hands, so it really became a matter of policy popularity, which is why they were working with crowds. But Hondo had seemingly won everything he came here for. As he finished up this debriefing, a crimson lightsaber emerged from the door that Dooku just stormed out of, and the Jedi Master, without even blinking, whipped his saber from his belt, swinging it up past his burgundy trench coat and colliding with Dooku. They leaned in as their sabers sizzled between them, and Ohnaka asked where his master was. A shock rode itself across the Elder's eyes, and he was pushed back. Hondo had no intention of beating the generational duelist in combat. Even with his modified saber, it would be nearly impossible. Master Ohnaka had one of the most distinguishable weapons in the entire Order. It was a lightsaber equipped with a miniature handle that could fire stun rounds, electrical bursts, or even a low-powered blaster shot that could kill in extremely close range. Hondo backed away, letting the blue saber direct his opponent further from him. The Grand Master told everyone to evacuate the room, so that they wouldn't have to watch this embarrassment, and as Dooku scowled at the mockery, a chilling voice told themselves that they weren't going anywhere. They were all in big poodoo this time. A saber staff ignited, and Hondo slid his body to the left, and let Dooku swing past him as the use of force to pull Jar Jar's attention. This wasn't necessarily a mind trick, but it also wasn't not necessarily a mind trick. Hondo told the Gungan Sith Lord that this endeavor wouldn't be profitable for either of them. The shift made by the Sith would have involved massacring the entire committee and trying to throw the blame at Hondo for doing it, suggesting that Dooku tried to save them but couldn't and ended up killing Hondo anyways. Essentially one survivor's word against whatever really did happen. Ohnaka planned on surviving though, so that might interrupt their hopes. Blades collided as the people of the committee got to the furthest point in the room to avoid the clashing sabers. Hondo wasn't the most skilled duelist in the galaxy, among the top 5 in the council, but he relied on uncommon dueling patterns, uncharacteristic of Jedi. He used the blaster on his saber to keep Dooku, then Jar Jar, at bay. It assisted him with maintaining his own energy while also providing him the chance to signal out his opponents. Tyrannus and Jar Jar provided an intense challenge for him, but not one that couldn't be overcome. Throughout their engagement, they were distracted by sabers igniting through the door and providing an escape for the other senators, as the Jedi spies and Senate commandos provided protection. Dooku was ordered to kill the other Jedi because he was talented enough to do that, and as he moved to confront them, he was blasted in the back with an electric burst, one that planted a Charlie horse into both of his calves, and he dropped to the ground, before the other Jedi, who cornered him by placing their weapons at his neck and confiscating his lightsaber. The fight was now between Grand Master and Sith Lord. Jar Jar attempted to use his hidden Shodo against the Jedi, but it didn't work. It only provided Hondo with information about his opponent's deception. Their lightsabers bounced off one another, clashing and quickly covering the sides of the room with dents and scars. The irony is, both duelists were very defensive in this duel, so it was constantly a backpedal for both of them. Jar Jar, in an attempt to cover his attack, created a force storm. A large cloud moved above them and darkened the entire area, forcing the duel to become a flashing of blue and red. Hondo laughed at this futile attempt, as he centered himself in the Force and batted every strike away from himself, before interlocking with Jar Jar in hand-to-hand combat. They were face to face, and Hondo, as they were pressing against each other, asked the Sith Lord if he preferred his Gungan frogs fried or in a soup. This was quite the jarring question, and it led to a headbutt from the Weequay Jedi, who twisted a saber under Jar Jar's wrist and then shot him with a lightsaber pistol. He stepped away and took a deep breath as Jar Jar dropped. The other onlookers were confused, and Hondo smiled, and spun his saber like a pistol before holstering it. His shoulders lifted, and he walked forward with a giggle, telling them all that a little misdirection never hurt anyone. Asking Jar Jar about his favorite frog dish wasn't anything real. It was just meant to get him thinking about something else. Everyone inside the Senate building knew that the Gungan representative loved his frogs, so it was only a matter of time until he met a bigger fish. Hondo then looked to Dooku and patted him on the shoulder, asking if it really was a bigger fish, right? Tyrannus would be found of all of his crimes in the following weeks, and Hondo would completely abandon his bid for the Chancellor race, allowing Lat Da to get swept by Bail Antilles in one of the worst election losses of all time. Alderaan was back in control, and while the new Chancellor wouldn't provide much growth for the Republic, he would be a return to at least a normal politician, which was better than having Palpatine for all of 24 hours or so. Yep, Dooku would tell everything, mostly because Qui-Gon assisted in these questionings. The disappointment that continued to sit on Qui-Gon's face upset Dooku greatly, but there wasn't anything he could do about it. He made these choices, and now he had to live with them. It was a shame he chose the Sith path, but Jar Jar was, at the time, the right choice. Grand Master Ohnaka would avoid the Republic for a good while. Despite him enjoying the excitement inside the Senate, it wasn't really for him. He was good at it, but he needed some time to be with more understanding people. So he and the council took a little field trip to the bars inside the party district of Coruscant. This was mostly a university town, but it was where all the life was at, and Hondo, like the council, were going to celebrate their victory over the Sith. It was a little rough to start with. Yeah, imagine Plo, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Mace, Oppo Rancisis, and Adi Gallia hanging out. Not really party people. Yaddle was the friend of the group that acted like the mom, and Plo was acting like the dad, but once they got a couple shots down their throats, thanks to some eager university students, they loosened up quite a bit. Yeah, Plo Koon loves his rave music. Apparently after 5 shots he does. The council, aside from their Grand Master, were lightweights, so Hondo enjoyed watching each of them get blitzed 40 minutes after they arrived. The night was fun for all of them. The Sith were gone, and they needed to live a little. It definitely helped the Jedi's reputation because the HoloNet erupted with memes and trends about the Jedi party on Academy Boulevard. They lived their best lives for 13 hours, and many of them would never do it again. If Mace thought a hangover was bad in his 50s, then could he really imagine what Plo, Mundi, Oppo, Yaddle, and Yariel went through in their first hangover in their entire lives in their late hundreds? Little rough. They skipped the next day of council sessions, but when they did regather, they gave themselves a series of good laughs. It was kind of funny. Mace was doing keg stands. Plo and Yaddle had some Jaeger bombs, a little too many, and Hondo lost track of drinks after round 5. This is something that the Jedi Council would eventually continue to do in months going forward. It helped them both reconnect with themselves, but also earn more compassion from the people of the galaxy. With the Sith exposed, as mentioned 5 times before, their plot exposed, and a firm nothing burger inside the Senate office, the Jedi were able to maintain positive operations in the galaxy. The duo of Qui-Gon and Anakin would see to it that slavery would be destroyed. Plo Koon would make sure everyone had Jaeger bombs, and the Grand Master, well, he was able to put Grand into the title. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Let's talk about this story. Little different, little weird. Initially, this is like a meme kind of idea. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of started writing this and I was like, it'd be kind of ironic if Hondo was like this really, like, kind of intelligent Jedi. Because he's a very intelligent pirate, he just doesn't get lucky all the time. This was more of him getting lucky. That's really it. He's really lucky in this episode. He's really lucky in this story. Most of Hondo is just goofing about, and that was kind of the fun part about this, is just taking a lot of weight off the premise of the story, and just having fun with Dooku, Jar Jar, and Hondo kind of being at each other's throats by accident, and not really meaning to be. And honestly, Hondo as Grand Master, I feel like would just piss everybody off. Like, I feel like he'd get on the nerves of the council, I feel like he'd get on the nerves of pretty much everybody, and that's what ends up breaking Dooku. He's not even trying to turn Dooku against him, he just ends up pissing him off. So, you know, a little goofy, a little different, but I hope you all enjoyed this tonal shift for a video. You know, it's not meant to be as serious as some of the other stories, but I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.